The story begins in the year 2100, and planet Earth is completely devastated. Then, a mysterious man in a cape flies over a ruined city, riding on a fighter jet. With a determined look, he reveals that he's finally found the person he was looking for. So, without wasting any time, the white-haired young man leaps from the high-speed jet. Meanwhile, down on a destroyed street, a young man is running for his life. He screams for help while trying to escape from something terrible. Crying in terror, the boy asks if there's anyone there to help him. Just then, a giant, scary monster appears right behind him, and to make matters worse, another bizarre creature shows up in front of him. The young man falls to the ground, completely surrounded, and begs for help. In a final act of desperation, he screams for anyone who can save him. At that moment, the young man looks at a broken photo of his family, surrounded by the beasts. He wishes that those responsible for turning the world into this would be punished and pay for everything they did to humanity. But just as he was about to be overcome, a light descends from the heavens. The attack hits the monsters, and the white-haired young man appears to save him. The mysterious hero then apologizes for taking so long to arrive. Confused and scared, the boy asks who his savior is. The white-haired man just looks at him with a serious and confident gaze. The young man cries with relief and asks if they can finally have their world back. The hero nods and hugs the young survivor, but the young man was already hurt, so the savior tells him to rest now. With his last bit of strength, the boy thanks the hero with a smile. After offering one last thank you, the young man falls to the ground, unmoving. The white-haired man stands in silence, watching over the boy's body. At that moment, another man in a lab coat appears and asks if he arrived too late. His companion explains that he was the last survivor in the area and asks Jin to face the truth. The protagonist then looks at his friend with a gaze full of anger. The scientist declares that humanity has reached its end. Then, an explanation begins, and it's revealed that monsters were born from pollution. These mutant creatures are known as the Corruptors. They possess incredible regeneration powers and would attack humans. Not even humanity's strongest weapons could defeat them. But people didn't give up and conducted experiments to fight back. The man in the lab coat asks what the point is if there's no one left to save. With the last survivor on the ground, he laments that they arrived too late. The protagonist then says there is still something worth saving. Kagura asks if he still believes there are survivors, and Jin says no. With a confident smile, the hero says he's thinking about the future. He then asks if the nanomachines his friend created can heal the environment. These nanomachines won't just nullify the incredible regeneration of all those terrifying monsters. They will also begin the process of a total recovery for our entire tired planet. With that, the world will one day regain its former beauty, and the young man smiles at this hopeful idea. He believes a new civilization will grow and prosper, just as humanity did in the distant past. But the scientist with glasses thinks this crazy plan sounds more like an impossible fairy tale. Even so, the doctor accepts the challenge and watches his friend walk away down the dark corridor. The protagonist knows that even a small chance of success is enough for him to move forward. Soon, we see a secret, high-tech facility hidden deep underground for the great experiment. Then, the white-haired warrior enters a green light capsule, while his colleague prepares everything. At this moment, the researcher looks at the container and wonders if this will really save the future. With the device properly activated, the system announces that the hero's deep sleep has now begun. The time starts counting from 0, while the beasts still dominate the entire dark and lifeless coast. 5 and then 20 years pass, and the giant creatures continue to roam freely across the dry land. After 153 years, the planet still looks like a very polluted, red ball in space. When the counter reaches 974, the mutants are still hunting in the deserted streets. Over 1,300 years later, the toxic fog finally begins to clear near the calm beaches. Reaching 8,400 years, Earth returns to its bright blue color as seen from space. With more than 30,000 years of waiting, new types of mutant beings appear in the middle of the wilderness. At this point, the time reaches 84. 4,000 years, and green forests cover the ancient human ruins. Finally, after thousands of years of waiting, animal life is reborn in a completely clean and beautiful world. 100 million years have passed, and with that, the system confirms the access key to begin the awakening. At that moment, we see someone running desperately through that ancient technological facility. Out of breath, a small girl with animal-like ears runs while trying to escape from something dangerous. With that, a group of children flees from a shadowy monster that's right behind them. The young girl then wonders if the savior is really there, and her friend confirms it with certainty. But she knows that if she doesn't find anyone there, they will all be lost forever. Clutching her necklace tightly, the little girl shows she's very nervous about the whole situation. Silently, the girl prays for the guardian god to appear and save her friends' lives. Just then, the trio arrives in front of a giant door and believes the protector is on the other side. But upon opening the entrance with great effort, the youngsters are surprised by what they find inside. Looking around, they realize the place seems to be a dead end, and they lose hope. With a sad look, the girl remains silent as she realizes the plan may have failed. In that instant, the shadow beast catches up to the children, and they all freeze in pure terror. It extends its claw to attack, but the young girl pleads for help in a final, desperate scream. Crying hard, the little girl calls out for the guardian god as she closes her eyes, expecting the worst. Suddenly, the capsule's glass begins to crack, and a powerful energy leaks from inside the container. With a burst of light, the hero awakens and launches an attack that hits the monster head on. Surprised, the children watch as the savior says that believing in that chance was always worth it. Then the white-haired warrior steps onto the wet floor, finally emerging from his long slumber. With his eyes glowing, he states that he always trusted in the possibilities of humanity's future. With that, the hero notices that the supply box his friend created worked very well. At this, he opens the compartment and finds his clothes stored exactly as they were before. The young man then looks at the monitors and realizes that 100 million years have passed since he went to sleep. At that moment, he sees that a lot of data is gone, but is surprised that the shelter is still intact. He finds a tech injector and concludes that the tiny machines helped with the preservation. But now, the protagonist holds a message cube and wants to understand what happened to the planet. Turning to the beast children, the man says he wants to hear their story as they hide. At this, the little ones are shocked to learn that the warrior was without his clothes for all that time. But soon, the savior starts getting dressed to finally leave that ancient underground base. Adjusting his gloves and his long coat, the hero feels that this look is perfect for him. Then, the enormous metal doors open slowly, revealing the bright light from outside. Accompanied by the youngsters, the white-haired man steps out of the hideout, shielding his eyes from the sun. With a curious look, the protagonist observes the new scenery that stretches out before his eyes. Before him appears a green paradise, and the man reflects on how much Earth has changed in 100 million years. He realizes the place is unrecognizable, while the girl calls him Protector God again. At that moment, the little girl asks him to follow her as she runs happily through the open field. Watching the little ones closely, the hero becomes thoughtful about the origin of these new living beings. He wonders if they are real humans, since humanity was supposed to have been gone for ages. Perhaps they are creatures that evolved to look like people during all this time of waiting. Jin concludes that the nanomachines influenced their speech and realizes he hasn't introduced himself yet. The hero introduces himself as Shido Jin, and the little girl says her name is Hakama Phil. Next, the chubby boy calls himself Dampu, while the cat boy says he is Shandy. With that, the young man asks what he should do, and the girl explains that they are arriving at their destination. She then asks him to defeat the corruptors, and the savior is surprised to hear that ancient name. Suddenly, little Shandy panics as he sees something terrible happening up ahead. In the distance, the group notices that the children's village is on fire under a cloudy sky. Desperate, the youngsters run toward the fire, shouting for their parents, while Jin tries to stop them. But the white-haired warrior observes everything very carefully and realizes the danger is real. He notices the place is only protected by simple and crude wooden barricades. As the flames consume the old structures, the hero senses the suffering of those people. At that moment, the young man concludes that this new civilization doesn't seem to be advanced at all. Then, Hakama stops running and freezes completely upon seeing a desperate scene. An elderly woman fights bravely against a giant insect monster to protect her village. With great difficulty, the grandma asks why the children returned to such a dangerous place. Observing the creature from a distance, Jin wonders if that being is really one of the original corruptors. He notices that the monster is identical to the enemies from his past and goes on high alert. But the little girl begins to glow with a green light and says she is going to save everyone right now. So the hero decides to act to confirm his suspicions about the power of these strange beasts. With a quick and precise move, the man lands a powerful blow that sends the creature flying. In that instant, the savior carefully holds the elderly woman and says, "Excuse me," as he takes over the fight. Then, the little girl prepares her magic power, and the hero encourages her to attack the beast. With that, the young girl concentrates an absurd amount of energy and launches a giant fireball at the monster. The fiery attack hits the creature head-on, causing a huge explosion in the area. At that moment, the violent impact completely destroys the bizarre insect's head. Observing the beast's body, he notices that its healing was nullified thanks to the nanomachines. Intrigued, the man wonders how she used the technology, since it required compatibility, so the warrior asks if everyone there knows how to do that, and the old woman replies that only a few can. The woman calls this ability divine power, and the protagonist finally understands the situation. Soon, the boys approach, and the older one scolds the grandma for having returned to the village. With a very sad expression, the old woman laments, saying their hometown was already gone. She begins to explain that the horrible monster they just saw was actually, the creature was just a newborn hatchling, which makes the mood much more tense among them. The leader says that the main beast is much stronger, and soon a swarm of hatchlings will attack. But suddenly, a young warrior appears on the scene and tells the woman not to lose hope. The confident young man guarantees he can take down the monsters alone using his sharp spear. Relieved, the elderly woman asks about the other villagers, and he confirms they are all in the shelter. At this, the girl's father runs and hugs his daughter, saying he was worried about her disappearance. The little girl confesses she went to the sealed door, and the old woman is startled by the girl's boldness. Soon, the cat boy points to the savior and says that he is the great guardian god from the legends. With a very serious gaze, the white-haired hero watches the giant beast approaching. At this, the cat boy points to the hero and says he is just from an inferior race without animal power. The youth scoffs, saying it was just a coincidence, but the girl defends the savior with everything she has. But the arrogant warrior laughs at the situation and guarantees he can also defeat those weak hatchlings. At that moment, the white-haired man steps forward and asks everyone to listen very carefully. However, the young man raises his spear and warns that the village doesn't accept help from weak intruders like him. With that, the young warrior walks right past the hero and tells him not to meddle in their problems. Then, the adult villager asks where the young man is going, and he replies that he's going to take down the giant beast. Full of swagger, the cat boy tells everyone to stay there trembling in fear while he handles the situation. At this, the old woman gets furious and says that foolish kid could survive if he would just run away. Observing all this confusion, the protagonist just remains silent, analyzing the people's behavior. Next, the woman thanks him for his help and begs the outsider to take the children to the shelter. But the little girl surprises everyone and declares that she will follow the warrior, risking her own life. In that instant, the white-haired man refuses to run and decides he will take the lead in the battle. With her eyes shining with hope, the young girl smiles and senses the immense pride of that legendary hero. Confidently, the warrior declares he won't let anyone call him part of an inferior race, only for them to go off and get themselves defeated. A gigantic creature full of scary eyes emerges from the shallow water. With that, We see the young warrior's fists clench with determination, so the feline boy takes a step forward and gets the terrible beast's attention. At that moment, he creates lightning around his body, claiming to be the great protector of this place. The cocky one points his shiny weapon at the creature, promising to finish off the intruder. Without wasting any time, the boy leaps high into the air, charging straight for his opponent. But the abomination just stares at him as a strange goo drips from its body. Suddenly, several other pieces of the monster start to come out of the muddy water. Just then, the giant shadow reveals that two smaller offspring have also joined the fight. With agility, the warrior spins his spear, creating an electric shield against the beasts. Soon, he prepares for a powerful attack, wanting to settle everything in a single blow. Then, the boy launches a devastating energy beam straight at the large target. The electric shock hits the creature's face head-on, causing a lot of damage. Believing he is won, the young man lands on the ground with a very smug smile. However, the dust settles, and the monstrous beast reappears, ready to fight again. In that instant, the huge wound on the creature's face begins to heal at high speed. Watching the regeneration, the feline boy is in shock and loses all his tough guy posture. Without mercy, the abomination raises a huge claw and attacks the boy, who falls to the ground defenseless. Scared to death, the boy just squeezes his eyes shut, waiting for his tragic end. But the white-haired savior appears, creating a tech shield and blocking the blow. The feline boy is in complete shock to see that he was saved from that dangerous attack. With that, the hero goes right past the boy, launching a powerful energy slash at the bizarre creature. But the warrior notices that the giant monster is still standing, even after such a powerful blow. Then, the protagonist raises his hand and prepares to use his special abilities in the battle. With that, a huge, destructive beam of light pierces through the beast's chest, causing impressive damage. Watching the attack, the young man is stunned, while the villagers scream in desperation from afar. At that moment, the white-haired savior tells the group to get away from there as fast as possible. The elderly couple watches the whole scene, completely paralyzed by the stranger's absurd power. The old woman shows confusion and wonders what just happened right in front of them. Suddenly, the immense creature raises its giant hand, preparing a crushing attack against the two. Without a second thought, the hero grabs the cocky kid and decides it's better for them to retreat now. With that, the protagonist leaps at high speed, getting the little guy out of the danger zone of that blow. Then, the creature hits the muddy ground, causing a huge impact right where they were before. With great agility, the warrior lands safely and sets the young feline down on solid ground. Lying on the ground, the boy looks at the stranger and asks who exactly this powerful man is. But the savior just watches the abomination regenerating all its serious wounds in a few seconds. He explains that a special technology is needed to nullify the healing of these monsters. The warrior looks at the boy and concludes that this is what those people call divine power nowadays. At this, the hero compliments the boy's electric attack, but warns him that the blow didn't go deep enough. Totally amazed, the boy asks if he is a god, and the warrior replies that he doesn't remember that. The white-haired hero approaches and says he needs to tell him something very important. With a calm look, he reminds the boy that he said the monster was only the village's problem. At this, the feline boy gets upset and says he doesn't agree with the stranger's attitude. But the protagonist faces the giant beast and declares that now, that creature has become his problem. At that moment, the bizarre creature attacks by surprise, using its huge tail with great force. With agility, the savior dodges the dangerous blow and glides over the water with great ease. Then, with a very calm expression, he plans to immobilize the enemy before anything else. With that, the warrior creates a glowing shield and blocks an absurd impact without any effort. Soon, the monstrous abomination emerges from the shallow water, roaring with fury at the boy. The hero explains that those beasts were born because of all of humanity's stupid mistakes. With that, the stranger clenches his fist as a strong electric energy begins to glow in his hand. He reveals that he lived 100 million years ago, and that's why he carries such a huge weight on his shoulders. Preparing a devastating attack, The protagonist states that he is the only one who can solve this. Confused, the feline boy asks if he can win, and the warrior assures him that he is fully capable. In that instant, he remembers the old wars with knights fighting in endless battles. Next, we see modern soldiers fighting in tragic conflicts that destroyed civilization. With that, scientists performed painful experiments trying to save a history full of conflict. And the result of all this is that powerful warrior, being the last human created on Earth. Then, the savior unleashes all his power, firing a gigantic beam of light at the monster. The impact hits the enemy head-on, and the beast is completely frozen before that force. A giant beam of white energy shoots from the hero's hand and hits the creature dead-on. At that moment, the intense light completely swallows the monster and vaporizes its body. Watching everything from afar, the villagers are left with their mouths wide open at the impact of this blow. Meanwhile, the little girl breaks into a huge smile, full of admiration for the savior. The power was so absurd that the beam of light cut through the clouds and could be seen from space. As the smoke clears, only a glowing green puddle is left of that scary beast. The young feline breaks into a cold sweat and realizes the gap in strength that exists between him and the stranger. Dusting off his hands, the warrior calmly announces that he is the last one, and soon he puts the boy on his shoulders, claiming to be humanity's final scientific weapon. With that, the white-haired man takes a deep breath while watching the calm return to the sea. Suddenly, a girl with glasses hiding in the bushes says she came to investigate the intruders. Using a special lens, she is shocked because not even the captain of the knights could do that. Seeing the incredible sight up close, the young spy feels her heart race with excitement. With a flushed face, she decides she needs to return to the royal capital as quickly as possible. Later in the dark forest, the hero activates a cube that projects a message from his friend. The scientist's hologram smiles, saying he always wanted to talk to someone after he was gone. The researcher asks how the future is, and guesses that nature must have recovered by now. However, the doctor's tone changes, and he warns that there is a very serious problem in this story. He explains that even with the planet healed, the mutant monsters wouldn't just disappear on their own. Hearing this sad warning, the protagonist remains silent, with a very serious look. At this, the doctor says that he noticed something very strange 1,000 years after the hero fell asleep. Then, the friend reveals that he also entered a deep sleep to watch over the world's changes. As the planet improved, the number of those terrible beasts decreased more and more. But looking at the global map, he noticed that a new problem was emerging there. In the images, a new creature with purple hair appeared next to a downed animal. This new mysterious being seemed much more intelligent and lethal than the old monsters. The researcher explains that the beasts began to evolve along with the improvement of the environment. With that, he warns that these stronger mutants would be a great threat in the future. The only way out was to give a little energy to the new life forms so they could fight. Besides that, the scientist also prepared a special, power-filled gift for the hero. Confused, the warrior looks at a glowing cube in his hand and tries to understand the situation. With that, he takes out a syringe full of a glowing green liquid from inside the object. Without wasting time, the protagonist injects the substance into his arm to receive this new strength. His body begins to glow with pure energy because he is the only one compatible with the technology. The savior stares at his own hands as he feels all this new energy coursing through his veins. Suddenly, a bright, technological blade magically forms in the palm of his hand. He realizes he can create weapons using the technology and finds this ability very useful. The hologram says that he hid more upgrades like this in secret bases all over the world. He spread the items across the map to prevent enemies from destroying them all at once. But the main reason was to make the warrior travel a lot and explore this new world. At this, the scientist comments on the distant future and the new, dangerous threats of those beasts. Then he shows that even with all this imminent danger, the current world has improved a lot. The researcher remembers that in the past, the situation was much darker and more desperate, but now, people can run free and happy through the forest without so much fear. With that, cities were rebuilt, and peace returned to reign in these new villages. Soon, humans can finally study and live peacefully in their safe homes. The hologram gives a warm smile and asks his great friend to enjoy this world. At that moment, the image begins to flicker, and the doctor regrets not being able to see the end of the journey. His appearance ages, revealing that he dedicated his entire life to this incredible project. The protagonist becomes very sad to see the last moments of his dear partner. With his last words, the researcher leaves the fate of the planet in the warrior's hands. The hero puts away the cube, accepting the mission, as the children run toward him. The little beast, folk arrive out of breath, saying that everyone was looking for the stranger. Excited, they pull the boy's arm, saying the party can't start without the savior. At this, the white-haired man is a little surprised by this warm reception, but suddenly, he notices something shining on the little girl's neck and focuses his attention there. The warrior holds the small key and asks where the girl got that pendant. She explains that it's a treasure passed down from generation to generation by her ancient clan. The young girl says the item was meant to summon the protector god in times of great danger. Smiling, the hero finally understands how he was awakened and decides to go with his new friends. At night in the village, everyone celebrates the victory around a large, lively bonfire. Just then, some villagers call their friends to join the party and have a drink together. When the hero arrives, a villager asks if he really is the famous guardian god from the legends, but another guy scoffs, claiming that the stranger seems to be from a much inferior race. The feline boy gets angry at the comments and goes to confront that little group. With a strong and precise kick, the boy knocks down one of the men who spoke ill of the savior. He yells that they ran away and that's why they didn't see the incredible power of that great warrior. The children now look at the protagonist with great admiration, unlike before. At that moment, the girl's father and the village elder approach the white-haired boy. The village leader thanks him on behalf of everyone for saving the lives of those suffering people. The man says the place would have been destroyed, and that's why they want to repay this great debt. With a calm smile, the warrior tells them both not to worry about such things. However, since they insist so much, the savior asks for information instead of material goods. He wants to know about the current state of the world, and this leaves the village leader very confused. The old woman then advises the hero to go to the royal capital to get what he's looking for. She explains that the city is where King Cormosia lives, who rules over that entire huge country. The villagers usually go there to sell their special silkworm fabrics. The journey is long, but the old woman trusts that the protector will be fine despite the dangers. She asks him to take Hakama as a guide, since the little one also needs to go to the capital. The young girl can use divine power, and there's an academy there to train that kind of magic. The new morning brings a beautiful day to the small, quiet, and calm village. The protagonist then opens the door and smiles, enjoying the fresh air of this new world. He observes the landscape and reflects that he never imagined he would see such a beautiful scene. With a sad look, he regrets that his friend Kagura isn't there to see all of this. At this, the feline boy approaches with new clothes and calls the hero the guardian god. The boy then tells the stranger to get dressed quickly because he's not wearing anything. With everything ready, the warrior and the little girl begin their long journey to the capital. The old woman gives one last piece of advice for the little one to be a good guide during the trip. The young warrior complains that he wanted to go along, but Grandma tells him to go study first. The savior turns to the boy and compliments his moves in the battle from the day before. At this, the feline boy turns bright red with embarrassment and says he'll wait for him in the capital. With great excitement, he yells that he's going to study hard, and the girl's father thanks the hero. The man asks the protector to take care of his daughter, as the road can be dangerous. Saying goodbye, he asks the young girl to take good care of herself and always watch her health. Then, the pair finally says goodbye to everyone and sets off down the road toward their destination. The girl runs ahead excitedly while the white-haired man follows her calmly. They follow the trail next to a sparkling river, surrounded by the area's lush nature. At dusk, The two stop to rest in front of a beautiful waterfall on the mountain. The little girl points to the horizon and shows the beautiful scenery to her new companion. At night by the fire, she says there are 4 days left, and he thinks the distance is short. The little girl asks why the hero wants to know about the world and calls him guardian god. With a mysterious look, the warrior replies that it's a big secret from her. He remembers his friend Kagura said that the monsters called corruptors don't go extinct. Just then, a bizarre creature appears in his mind, and he confirms that they exist in this era. But he reflects that the creatures should only appear in completely polluted places. The hero feels a strange energy, and the girl notices he's making a scary face. With that, he apologizes and says he was just thinking about some serious problems. The boy concludes that at least there are still people free from the rule of those monsters. He decides that the first step is to investigate how people deal with the corruptors. Then the warrior asks her to stop calling him a god and introduces himself as Jin. Suddenly, the sound of a horse at high speed breaks the silence of the dark night. The pair becomes alert, and the little girl gets scared by someone's unexpected arrival. A blond man approaches and apologizes for interrupting the two travelers' rest. Mounted on his horse, the knight asks if he can talk with the boy for a bit. The elf soldier has a serious look and shiny armor that shows his importance. Sitting calmly, the protagonist looks at the newcomer and asks who he is. The knight introduces himself as Argus Walton, the captain of the 7th Division of the Knights. Upon hearing the group's name, the hero wonders if they are the people he was looking for. At this, one of the captain's companions gets furious with the stranger's attitude. The warrior yells, telling the boy to stand up to show respect for her leader. The warrior complains about his insolence, but the captain tells her to stop right away. With a fake smile, the knight apologizes and invites the boy for a chat. The protagonist stands up and questions what the woman meant by those words. Then the soldier asks where they came from and what the pair's final destination is. At this, the little girl replies that they left Kodama village and are going to the royal capital. The irritated warrior flashes a wicked smile because she thinks she caught them in a lie. With that, she gets off her horse and prepares to attack the two travelers. The woman draws her sword and yells that there's no record of people like him in the village. The hero is surprised to learn that this country has such organized birth records. But the captain contradicts his partner and says the girl's story is true. He explains that the little girl's clothes are made of expensive and special fabrics from that region. The leader reinforces that the story makes sense, leaving his companion embarrassed. However, the knight's tone changes, and he grips the hilt of his sword tightly. Pointing the blade at the hero, he states that the white-haired man is different. The captain says the boy's clothes are strange and questions their origin. He reveals that bandits use children to rob cargo on that dangerous road. With that, the soldier accuses the pair of being criminals pretending to be harmless. The girl yells that they aren't bandits, but the knight says he will be the judge of that. Full of anger and fear, the little girl prepares to fight against that armed group. Then, a green electric power begins to glow in the young warrior's hands. With a cold and calculating look, the captain observes the energy coming from the girl. Then he warns the young girl not to do anything foolish with her electric powers. The other knight is stunned to see the little girl's divine power and notices her potential. Meanwhile, the hero faces the holy knights with a calm expression. The group's leader holds up a shining crystal and acknowledges that they are quite strong. At this, he points the sword at the boy and demands an answer about his origin. The knight threatens to finish the stranger right there if the answer doesn't please him. With impressive calm, the protagonist stares at the blade near his face. Without showing any fear, he takes a deep breath and says he also came from Kodama village. The brown-haired warrior is completely confused by that unexpected answer. The captain understands the situation and sheathes his sword, surprising his partner. He turns to the little girl and asks if she is lying about her story. The little one confirms everything and questions if Jin is the village's famous guardian god. With a thoughtful look, the soldier processes the information about the protector god. The knight asks if they're done, and the hero confirms the matter is settled. With that, he gets on his horse and apologizes for the rudeness, leaving his colleague in shock. The captain says they will meet again, because they are also going to the capital. He offers future help to settle a debt, and his partner yells at the leader. The knight announces that he is leaving, and the warrior can't believe the scene. The white-haired protagonist watches the group ride away with a faint smile. Riding away, the warrior furiously questions why the captain backed down. At this, she insists that the stranger was very suspicious and calls him an inferior race. The captain then reflects on the term, inferior race, with a very serious look. With a strange smile, he questions who the real inferior one is, leaving the woman confused. The other knight agrees with the leader, and the brown-haired warrior is shocked. With a calm look, she asks if her companion really didn't notice the situation. Then she reveals the huge power difference that exists between them and that man. At that moment, the captain reveals that he tried to attack the boy at least 3 times. The scene shows the knight pointing his sword at the white-haired warrior. His hand was shaking badly as he tried to use his special power against the target, but the protagonist's hand was glowing and blocking the attack without any effort. He explains that he was completely neutralized before he could even do anything. His partner asks if he used his divine power, and the captain confirms the attempt. Shocked, the warrior realizes that the leader's power wasn't even activated. The leader explains that he attacked the man the same way as the girl, but the spirits ignored him. The green-haired knight reveals that the same thing happened to her, leaving the other one confused. This means there is a gulf of divine power between them and that stranger. He concludes that only the great captain of the Holy Knights could achieve such a feat. The brown-haired knight gets even more irritated upon hearing this comparison. Angrily, she admits that she hadn't noticed anything about that situation at all. The captain says the boy was an anomaly, and she didn't notice because she's a rookie. Riding on, he confirms that the stranger probably defeated the monster from the village. The warrior insists that he's dangerous, but the leader says he'll keep an eye on the boy. With that, the other knight remembers they need to get back to the royal capital soon. Thoughtfully, the captain reflects on this so-called guardian god and his enormous raw strength. While looking at the castle, he imagines the possibility of having that man as an ally. He concludes that such great power would be very useful for the country's problems. The next day, the hero comments to the little girl that he met some interesting people yesterday. The little girl then asks if all the knights in the capital are at that level. She explains that that group was the elite, which is why they were called Holy Knights. The young girl says the leader's spiritual magic was on a completely different level. Then the girl explains that divine power comes from spirits, and the techniques are magics. With this, the protagonist understands that these so-called spirits are his nanomachines. He realizes that in this era, advanced science ended up becoming a kind of fantasy. The hero remembers the knight calling him an inferior race and becomes thoughtful about it. He repeats the insult out loud, and his travel companion gets very confused. The boy comments that there are many different species, and the little girl agrees with him. She says some look like fish, while others look a lot like insects. The young girl says her grandmother told her that long ago. Places to live were limited, so everyone changed their bodies to better adapt to the regions where they lived. The warrior is surprised and asks about adapting to the environment to survive. He deduces that some humans survived and evolved over millions of years. Then he asks if those who didn't change are the inferior species, and the young girl confirms it. She explains that those who didn't adapt are seen as weak and are therefore mistreated. The little girl reveals that many end up being sold, and the hero is shocked by the news. But the girl finds it strange to mistreat someone just because they are a little different. With that, the boy concludes that everyone in this world is completely nuts. At this, he smiles and compliments the girl for being a good person, and she seems a bit confused. Suddenly, the sound of gigantic footsteps gets their attention during their walk. A young blue-haired girl appears out of nowhere and desperately asks the pair for help. Running very fast, the stranger stumbles and falls hard on the dirt ground. The hero's companion runs to help the fallen girl and asks if she's okay. Watching the scene, the protagonist stares at the girl passed out on the ground. The blue-haired girl is breathing with difficulty and seems to be badly hurt, but the warrior notices that her ears are different and look like an elf's. Lying on the ground, the young woman is covered in scratches and dust all over her body. The hero analyzes her injuries and realizes the girl's situation is quite serious. The little girl places the woman's head on her lap and tries to wake her up with great concern. At this, the savior says he's going to heal the young woman and creates a bright blue light in his hand. Suddenly, the injured girl opens her eyes and stares at the boy with great surprise. In a very quick move, the girl puts a knife to her helper's neck. Completely surprised, the boy freezes in place and orders her not to move. The young woman threatens to take out the hostage if he tries to make any suspicious moves. The hero remains silent for a moment, trying to analyze what is happening. Just then, the wind begins to blow the leaves as the mood becomes increasingly tense. The protagonist takes a deep breath and warns the girl that she's making a big mistake. With an intimidating look, he states that her friends are already very close to where they are. The girl is terrified and doesn't understand how he discovered her plan. The stranger explains that this kind of power wasn't made to be used on people. But before the girl could answer, the hostage starts to charge up her special power. In a swift move, she breaks free by releasing a strong energy, and the woman cries out in pain. As she tries to escape, an invisible man points his large sword right at the warrior's neck. The enemy warns that if he moves, the blade will take him down. Surprised, the hero realizes that the invisibility power was incredibly good. The savior remembers the old technology, capable of copying the environment around the user. This ancient technology was basically used by the security forces of his time. Dropping the camouflage, the man praises the young woman's work and reveals his gang. The bandit questions which country the warrior came from for wearing such different clothes. Another henchman approaches and gets excited to learn that the target has divine power. The enemy asks if the warrior knows how to use the power, and the protagonist just smiles. Without warning, one of the bandits lands a kick right in the hero's stomach. The huge henchman yells at him not to get cocky and calls him an inferior race. Then the group's boss warns not to damage the goods, as he isn't worth much. One of the men wonders if the boy has divine power, and the other highly doubts it. At this, the little girl realizes they are the famous slave traders of the region. Angrily, the leader uses his electric power and tells the pair to take a nap. Scared to death, the girl thinks she's going to be sold as a slave by them. Later, in a dark place, the hero tries to wake up his travel companion. With a big scare, the little girl wakes up and realizes she's trapped inside a cage. She finds the savior in the same place and asks if he's okay, and the boy confirms he is. Then he looks around and wonders where they've ended up now. The warrior calmly explains that this is the base of the bandits who attacked them. Soon, he realizes that many other people have also been captured in the same way. In another cell, we see two injured prisoners with no hope in their eyes. At this, another young elf girl stares at the floor with great fear and despair in her cage. The protagonist duo observes the whole situation in silence inside their cell. The girl asks why he's not wearing clothes, and the hero says they took them because they were rare. With that, she finds the boy very calm, and he says he has spent his life almost without clothes. But the little girl asks why the powerful warrior simply didn't fight back during the attack. She says that with his strength, he could take down everyone there, and the hero just stares into space. One of the bandits tells the blue-haired girl to bring food to the prisoners. Meanwhile, in the cell, the hero meditates peacefully, and his partner watches in silence. The woman enters the area with a tray and is surprised to see the pair awake. With great anger, the little girl yells at the traitor, and the girl says she can hate her. With a sad look, the blue-haired young woman states that she doesn't expect to be forgiven by them. Gripping the bars tightly, the little girl glares at the woman with a look of pure fury. But the warrior interrupts the fight and says that the kidnapper is a very kind person. Completely confused, The girl doesn't understand the compliment and says a real villain wouldn't do that. The hero explains that bad people don't care if they are hated or if they need forgiveness. Then the boy stands up, and the two girls watch to see what he'll do next. Without any effort, the protagonist bends the thick metal bars of his cell. The blue-haired young woman's jaw drops at that absurd display of strength. At this, he walks out of the cage as if it were nothing, and the kidnapper is in shock. The warrior explains that he waited for her so they could talk without anyone listening. He asks where the person important to her is being held hostage now. The girl questions how he knew that, and the boy says it was just a hunch. He says that at first, he was fooled because the woman's injuries were real, but the hero realized that not even a bandit would hurt a partner that much. So he concluded that she was only helping the group because they had something against her. Hearing this, the blue-haired girl feels a sharp pain and bends over in agony. The warrior asks if it's her brother, and the young woman confirms that the bandits took him. She remembers the day the criminals took her brother and threatened to sell him. With tears in her eyes, the blue-haired girl shouts that they would be separated forever. Crying, she reveals that she has already lost her parents, and that's why she needs to protect her little brother. The hero's little companion watches the scene in silence, not knowing what to say. With a look full of fury, the protagonist calls those bandits the worst of the worst. His partner asks if he let himself be captured to save the woman, and the boy confirms it. He explains that villains are as stubborn as oil stains, and the girl is confused. The hero says that if one of them escapes, it will just cause more problems somewhere else. So he concludes that if you're going to finish them, you have to go all out. Without a second thought, the warrior punches the door and throws it with full force. The door flies and hits the guard head on as the protagonist leaves the prison. With a dark aura, he states that he will wipe out all the bandits, root and stem. At this, a memory from 100 million years ago appears in a futuristic city. We see the neon lights and flying cars of the ancient and advanced civilization. A black-haired, blue-eyed boy appears with his face all bruised. Back then, he watched news on TV about heroes who fought for justice. The boy dreamed of being like them, and that's why he walked alone through the city streets. But one day, he faced the harsh reality of that technological and modern world. He realized that a place that needs justice is a place where something is very wrong. He understood that the world was full of worthless people, overflowing with them. The boy just wanted to live a normal life, but fate had other plans for him. But the environment where he grew up didn't allow him a single minute of peace. So he decided to fight back with all his strength against that brute. The only option was to take them all down, leaving no one standing to tell the tale. With that, he kept fighting everyone who crossed his path with great force. The boy grew up, and his routine of fighting continued exactly the same as before. Without stopping, he continued to eliminate all the criminals who appeared before him, until one day, a mysterious man appeared to talk to the boy about his future. The young fighter listened intently to what that researcher had to say. The scientist said he was born in the wrong world and extended his hand to the boy. Back in the present, the hero drags one of the henchmen across the floor without any effort. The other guards are scared to death and tell the stranger to stop right away. But in a few seconds, they were all defeated, and one questions his real goal. Another henchman, slumped against the wall, asks where that powerful man came from. With that, the protagonist just gives a sinister smile without giving any answer. Without wasting time, he throws one of the enemies on top of his own partner in crime. The guard manages to catch his friend, but is shocked by the force of that attack. With great agility, the warrior attacks the next target without giving him time to react. At this, the bandit is paralyzed with fear while holding the body of his unconscious partner. The last bandit standing asks who the heck that guy is, and the hero just stares at him. Annoyed, the guard tries to fight back, but doesn't stand a chance against the warrior's strength. Suddenly, a scream of panic startles all the other prisoners in that place. The blue-haired girl recognizes the scream and turns around. Frightened by the situation, she asks who the warrior's partner is, and the girl replies that he is the guardian god. The hero's little companion confidently tells everyone to leave the fight to Jin. She guides the other prisoners out of the cell, and the other girl asks if they will be saved. The blue-haired young woman worries, because she knows the leader of the bandits is very strong. Then the group's boss gets scared and begs the warrior not to finish him off. The hero approaches the bandit, and he asks if the intruder is after his money. With a wicked smile, the group's boss opens his mouth to say something. At this, he offers the slaves to the warrior as a kind of peace agreement. The bandit says the boy can choose whichever one he likes the most as a gift. With a disgusted look, the protagonist glares at the leader and doesn't answer his proposal. Suddenly, the hero asks if he's done talking, and the bandit doesn't understand at all. The leader of the criminals is completely shocked by what's happening. He panics because his spiritual magic has simply stopped working out of nowhere. The bandit wonders what kind of power that is to be able to nullify his abilities. The warrior explains that the group's boss is a pretty mediocre villain and easy to deal with. He says that real villains would have run away the moment they saw his power. He explains that this type of villain always underestimates their opponent and thinks they can win. And when they're about to lose, they beg for their lives in great fear. The group's boss gets desperate and decides he needs to escape from there as fast as possible. He runs to a lever on the wall and yells that the fight isn't over yet. With a wicked smile, the bandit activates the mechanism and opens a secret door. From inside the dark room, a giant, purple monster appears with a threatening look. The protagonist faces the creature, and the boss says that this is a special invader. With a strong kick, the monster breaks the gate and frees itself from its cage in a rage. The group's boss says that if flattery didn't work, he has no other choice. With great confidence, he yells that the monster will finish off the warrior in seconds. The creature attacks the boy with a powerful punch, and the bandit breaks into a victorious smile. But the hero just faces the attack and prepares to strike back with the same force. He catches the beast's fist with one hand and stops the blow without any effort. The leader of the criminals is left with his mouth wide open upon seeing that unbelievable scene. The warrior explains that he was born with a superhuman constitution, which is why he's so strong. He says he has many more muscle fibers than a normal human being would have. With a precise punch, the protagonist hits the monster head on and sends it flying. At this, he warns that he's not going to hold back and releases a blue energy around his body. With his divine power, the boy launches a gigantic beam of light at the creature. Scared to death, the bandit watches the monster get vaporized by the warrior's attack. Surprised, the criminal's boss questions how the boy managed to do that without using divine power. With a serene look, the warrior just listens as the bandit asks what he plans to do next. At this, the group's leader starts to break into a cold sweat and begs for mercy, terrified of that man. But soon he gives a nervous smile and deduces that the savior won't let him leave there alive. Without giving him time to talk, the hero lands a very strong kick right in that scoundrel's face. With the enemy knocked out, the protagonist finally puts on his long coat and prepares to leave. Then he adjusts his collar, satisfied to have finally recovered all his stolen clothes. At that moment, the warrior looks at the trapped children and asks them to wait just a little longer. He promises he'll get everyone out of that horrible place as soon as he takes care of a few small details. With that, the stranger goes to a table and says he needs to find proof of the gang's crimes. Opening one of the wooden drawers, the boy finds a strange document and becomes very curious. Holding the mysterious paper, he realizes that the text has a very strong smell of conspiracy. However, the language written on the document is completely unknown and has completely bizarre letters. Totally confused, the hero stares at the sheets without being able to understand a single thing on them. But, pretending to be cool, the warrior gives a smirk as if he understood the whole situation. Soon, he thinks it over and decides he'll ask his little companion to teach him to read later. At this, the savior observes the dark stones on the floor and wonders about the real reason for capturing the monster. Wanting to find out the truth, He brings his glowing hand closer to the remains of that giant abomination. Then the boy uses his technology to access the cameras of the nanomachines scattered around the place. With the floating screens, he searches for any recordings made during the last week at that base. The hero is surprised to discover that the bizarre monster was brought there on purpose by them. The recording shows the bandit arguing that capturing that dangerous monster would be useless. But a mysterious man states that interesting things would soon happen in that country. Analyzing the images, the protagonist realizes that the whole situation was a set-up. That attack on the village wasn't just a simple, isolated coincidence of fate. He understands that they captured the monster to carry out some much darker plan. At this, the hostages gather outside the base and wonder if they are finally safe. The blue-haired young woman hears footsteps and notices that the tracked people are all scared. With great excitement, the little blue-haired boy runs towards his sister to hug her. The boy calls out to her, and the girl runs to meet him, full of joy. The siblings hug each other tightly, happy to be together again and safe. With tears in her eyes, the girl cries with relief at finally being able to protect her brother. The young woman thanks him very much for his help and says the warrior is her life savior. Smiling, the hero replies that he's not a god, but that she doesn't need to worry. But suddenly, he points to the men who are restraining the defeated bandits there. The short-haired girl explains that they aren't from the territory, but are employees of the guild. She proudly says that she called the guild, and the boy is impressed by her action. The young woman also reveals that the big guy near them is the boss of everything there. At this, the old man with large horns approaches and asks if the warrior is responsible for this. The man bows politely, thanking him for his cooperation, and introduces himself as Padrak. Impressed with the boy, he concludes that this stranger is no ordinary man. The guild leader says they received many requests to take down the group of criminals. The hero is surprised to learn that the king of the territory never did anything to resolve the situation. Surprised by the confusion, Padrak laughs and explains that the leader there has no authority. He says that the people in charge of dealing with crimes are the members of his guild, because his organization swore eternal loyalty directly to the great king of the whole country. He reveals that if the local king made any mistake, they would arrest him themselves. Padrak comments that, in the end, his guild functions as a kind of police force. But soon, the hero recalls the mysterious conversations involving the captured monster and the king. The white-haired warrior concludes that this king is not trustworthy at all. At this, he apologizes and tells the guild leader to forget what he had said. The hero decides to keep the truth to himself, not revealing what he discovered. He looks at the people released on the street and asks Padrak what will happen to them now. The old man explains that the people they can identify will return to their own homes. But for those who have nowhere to go back to, the guild can't do anything to help. The girl lowers her head sadly, knowing her brother has nowhere to go. The white-haired warrior doesn't agree with the rule and asks if there are no shelters. Padrak shakes his head and replies that they don't have a place like that in the whole country. The hero looks with pity at the young woman's brother and says he would really like to help the pair. However, he suddenly realizes an incredible solution to solve their problem. He asks the two siblings if they would go to a place where they could work peacefully. With a very confident smile, the stranger states that he already has a perfect place in mind for them. At this, the boy remembers the friendly invitation that the leader of the Holy Knights made earlier. Then, the warrior gives a mysterious look, stating that this would be a special place to work. Far away, we see the large and luxurious royal capital, where the knight's huge family mansion is located. At that moment, the captain arrives mounted on his horse, accompanied by his entire team of soldiers. With agility, the leader dismounts his horse, finally ending that long patrol mission. Soon, he praises the good work of all his subordinates and tells the entire group to go rest. Suddenly, the blonde man feels a strange chill, and his green-haired partner notices his confusion. With concern, the warrior asks if something is wrong, but he plays it off, saying it was just a chill. Not paying it much mind, the soldier enters his enormous mansion, being greeted by the staff. With that, several maids with animal ears bow, welcoming their master. As he walks through the luxurious hall, the captain asks the head butler if there's any news, but the man in the suit starts to sweat, showing he's very nervous about the whole situation. Noticing the tense atmosphere, the blonde man stops walking and questions what exactly happened in his absence. Then the employee apologizes for bothering the tired leader, and the knight quickly reassures him. At this, the butler gets very close to his boss's ear and begins to whisper the big secret. Meanwhile, a very elegant blonde woman watches the whole conversation, hidden on the staircase. With a serious look and crossed arms, she just stares at the two in silence from the upper floor. Satisfied with the news, the soldier thanks him for the report, and the man states that it's just his duty. With his hand on his head, the captain realizes the situation is much worse than he imagined. He discovers that monsters have appeared in the capital and wonders where they came from. With a furious look, he deduces that someone must have let the creatures in on purpose. At this, the most suspicious place is Harnisk Academy, as access there is very restricted. But the soldier decides he needs a strong ally, and just then, the hero's group finally arrives. 3 days after defeating the bandits, the group continues their journey toward the capital. The blue-haired young woman asks if she'll really find a job, and Jin tells her not to worry. With a smile, he assures her she'll find something since she knows how to read, write, and do math. Much more cheerful, the girl fills with confidence and thanks her savior for the support. Suddenly, the hero's little companion points to the horizon and announces they've arrived. At that, the white-haired young man looks up, surprised by the view he's found. The group then observes the gigantic walled city, and Jin is impressed by its size. Inside the capital, the place is very busy and full of medieval-style houses. The warrior comments that the city is full of life, while the kids look at everything around them. The girl explains that the place thrives on imports, which is why everything ends up there. She says that even the people from her village sell their products there, and the hero remembers that detail. With that, the young man finds it all very fascinating as he sees people with insect wings in the crowd. A woman comments on the melting pot of races and cultures, showing how the place has evolved. In the shops, we see products from all over, and the streets seem to be very clean and organized. The children play freely, and the hero notices that law and order work very well there. But right after, the protagonist's demeanor changes to a much more serious expression. He remembers that behind the peace, there's still the dark side of forced servitude. With a distant look, the warrior concludes that every era carries its own problems. Then he asks when the academy's exam is, and the little girl replies that it's next week. The hero is relieved, and a young blonde woman thinks about them enrolling in Harnisk Academy. The blonde noble glares at them with disdain, wondering about those brats and mixed bloods. Later, the group finally finds a nice inn to rest from their long journey. Inside the room, the kids jump around excitedly and throw themselves onto the beds with great joy. Sitting down, the hero celebrates that he'll sleep in a real bed, and the girl agrees with him. At this, the warrior reflects that they've arrived safely, but now he needs to think about the group's future. With a bag of coins in his hand, he comments that to live in this era, you need money. The little one holds the reward, and the young man warns that it won't last forever. Besides that, he needs to find a job for the two siblings he rescued from the bandits. The hero thinks the shortcut would be to look for the blonded knight, but he has no way to contact him. With his hand on his chin, the protagonist tries to come up with a plan to solve all these problems. He then wonders if he should first investigate the corrupting monsters of this new era. An image of malicious people appears, and he realizes they're already using the beasts for their dirty plans. Looking out the window, the warrior concludes that he can't just ignore that threat. With a very determined look, he decides he needs to take action on this soon. Seeing the city outside, he vows that he won't let history repeat itself. The young man asks how to do research, and the girl says it's with a teacher or with books. The young woman says that books are expensive, and in her village, they would pool their money to buy them. But she remembers that the capital has a library where he can research whatever he wants. The warrior is intrigued by the idea of a library and repeats the word out loud. With a smile, he finds this useful, as he might find clues to his friend's laboratory. The pink-haired librarian smiles and informs them that their request is impossible to fulfill. She explains that the books are national treasures and entry isn't for just anyone. Therefore, access is restricted to students, teachers, and the local nobility of the capital. His little companion points out that Jin doesn't even know how to read, and he agrees that he's illiterate. He's been learning the alphabet, but it'll still take a long time for him to be able to read a page. With his hand on his face, the warrior wonders what to do, and two guys appear. The hooded duo observes the group, and one of them confirms they are their targets. Sensing their presence, the hero turns around and asks what those guys want. At that, one of the men with wolf ears lunges at the young man with a well-aimed punch. But the warrior blocks the blow with one hand without showing any difficulty. With a cold look, he remarks on the city's warm welcome and security. The hooded aggressor smiles and replies that the outsider was very mistaken about the place. With that, the enemy's hand starts to glow with a strong, powerful yellow energy. The two then test their strength as their magic clashes with great intensity. A small explosion of light happens in the middle of the street, startling all the residents. The young man with wolf ears backs away, and the hero praises his sharp instincts. The blue-haired girl is shocked to see them using divine power in broad daylight. The protagonist asks what they want, and the aggressor says that someone doesn't like him. Then the outsider understands that this is all a hired attack by an enemy. With a smirk, the hero finds the situation perfect for his future plans. The thug tells the hero to get out of the city, and Jin replies that he only worries about real danger. Annoyed by the response, the wolf-eared young man attacks again with everything he's got. But without any difficulty, the protagonist catches his opponent's fist in mid-air. With a quick move, the warrior twists the enemy's arm and throws him hard to the ground. At this, the red-haired partner gets furious and prepares a fireball in his hand. Then he launches the flaming attack toward the outsider, who just watches the blow. With a simple hand gesture, the hero dispels the fire magic as if it were nothing. The white-haired young man appears in front of the enemy, and he is shocked by the speed. Without giving him time to react, the savior grabs his opponent's collar forcefully. He tells the boy to come back when he's strong enough to be a real threat. With an intimidating look, the protagonist asks if the young man will have the courage to try again. Scared to death, the young man realizes the warrior isn't from an inferior race like he thought. His partner shouts that's enough, and a female warrior orders everyone to stay where they are. The knight complains that they're making a scene right on her day off, in the middle of the street. With that, she announces she's taking everyone to a cell and tells them to get ready. The hero smiles, because his plan to draw attention with the fight worked out perfectly in the end. Suddenly, the warrior recognizes the young man and shouts that he's that inferior from the forest. The scene shows the two thugs on the ground, and the knight staring at the outsider from a distance. With a malicious smile on her lips, the woman approaches the group, full of anger. She points her weapon at the hero and accuses him of causing trouble. As soon as he arrived in the capital, with a wicked smile, the warrior says that inferior species don't know what's right. But a woman with rabbit ears approaches and says she saw everything that happened. She states that the hero's group was attacked first and that it was all in self-defense. The knight is surprised by the testimony and looks at the two men lying on the ground. At that, she recognizes the aggressors and asks if they are students from Harnisk Academy. With her hand on her head, the woman laments the situation and hopes the young lady isn't involved. The hero asks about the young lady, and she tells the young man not to worry about it right now. With a smile, the outsider comments that the Holy Knights also go on patrol. The warrior explains that the capital is large, so they help maintain public order. But she becomes thoughtful for a moment and stares attentively at the white-haired young man. She realizes the man is very strong because the academy students weren't weak. Then the knight says goodbye and warns the hero not to cause any more trouble in the capital. However, the The protagonist interrupts her and says there's a place he'd like to show her. Completely confused by the request, the woman turns and questions what he meant by that. A short time later, the group arrives at the luxurious mansion of the artist family estate. Sitting in front of the captain, the hero makes his proposal and asks him to hire them. The blonde knight is completely shocked and remembers that he offered help if he needed it. He looks at the group and asks why the number of people has increased so much since the forest. The young man explains that he found the bandits and rescued the two siblings who were prisoners. At this, the captain asks about the criminals, and the hero says he left them with the guild. With his hand on his chin, the captain asks if he took care of the group of bandits by himself. The leader of the knights questions why he helped, and the young man says they have no family and are from an inferior race. With that, the warrior explains that he wanted to at least find a place for them to work. The captain doesn't understand the obligation, but the outsider replies that this is his way of doing things. The hero states that since he saved them, he will take care of the two siblings until the very end. With this attitude, the captain and his partner are impressed by the young man's determination. Hearing their savior's words, the siblings break into a smile full of hope and joy. The knight agrees and offers them a job as servants in the mansion, making the young woman very excited. However, the leader of the knights warns that there is one condition for accepting their deal. Then he reveals that he wants the outsider to become an instructor, and the young man is confused. With everything settled, the siblings put on new servant clothes and look very elegant. The white-haired warrior smiles and comments that they look very good in the new clothes. The young woman bows and thanks the captain very much for the opportunity, and he says there's no need. He leaves the two's education to the butler and warns him not to treat them badly because of their race. The siblings wave goodbye to their savior as he prepares for his mission. The protagonist questions the reason behind the invitation to be an instructor. The knight praises his insight and says he trusts him even without knowing his origin. With that, the captain reveals that he needs him to infiltrate the famous Harness Academy. The hero doesn't understand the request, and the soldier begins to explain the country's whole situation. He says that the country is a target of factions, and the protagonist questions the king's absence. The blonde man says the king is ill, and the fight for the throne has already begun in the shadows. At this, he explains that people with no right to the throne are planning to take over the entire kingdom. Because of this, they use invaders and put innocent people in the middle of this whole mess. Observing the scenario, the hero realizes that this lord isn't the only danger in the area, so the group decides they need to find these guys heading out as soon as possible. At that moment, the man in white asks if the academy is the most suspicious place. Knocking on the door, the knight announces that he's coming in to introduce someone. He reveals that a young woman will be the savior's guide inside that famous school. The light-haired girl is the soldier's younger sister who studies at the institution. With a serious look, she greets her relative while the others just watch. But the noble questions if they're really going to leave the mission in the hands of a mixed blood. Annoyed, the captain tells the girl to be respectful, but she continues with the insults. The young woman says she won't accept an inferior being doing such an important job. At that instant, the leader apologizes for the girl's very childish behavior. However, the little companion comments that the soldier himself is also prejudiced. Opening her fan, the student asks if the protagonist understands his duty. She explains that besides the infiltration, he also needs to act as an instructor. The girl doubts that someone of that race has the talent to teach the students. Suddenly, the little one blurts out that the young man doesn't even know how to read, leaving everyone in shock. With that, the blonde girl closes her eyes and says the situation is completely impossible. His little companion defends him, saying he's amazing and everyone can learn from him. At this, the blonde noble falls silent and stares at the young man with a serious look. Then she turns and admits that he has the strength to put the academy's students in line. But the young woman warns that being an instructor takes much more than brute force. With his hand on his face, the blonded knight is completely embarrassed by his sister's attitude. The dog-eared warrior understands that the students were sent by the young lady. The girl's brother apologizes, and the hero replies that it's all right and not to worry. The protagonist asks what he should teach, and the blonde man says it would be spirit magic. At that moment, the captain explains that the outsider seems to be very skilled with this power. The white-haired young man asks what part to teach, and the soldier says just the basics. He lists fire, lightning, ice, and healing spells, saying that knowing just one of them is enough. The warrior questions if that's all, and the knight is confused by the young man's response. The leader asks if he uses special magic, and the hero doesn't understand what he meant. At this, he remembers the bandit and wonders if he was strong by this era's standards. With a smirk, the protagonist finds the whole situation very interesting, so he decides to shatter the local common sense and prepares an attack with his hand. Outside, the young man launches an energy that opens a crater in the courtyard ground. A phantom appears and startles a man with a large nose who was watching from a distance. With a simple snap of his fingers, the warrior shows his total control over the magic. Suddenly, the wolf-eared man falls to his knees on the ground from the power of the spell. The wolf-eared man shouts and asks what the outsider did with that magic. Completely desperate, he accuses the young man of using a dirty trick and that he's never seen it before. On the other side of the scene, the pair of teachers just watches the commotion in the courtyard. With a smile, the captain says that this settles everything, and the school's headmaster agrees. At that moment, the academy students look at the young man with great astonishment and fear. The young blonde woman is shocked by the magic, and her colleague confirms it was a special power. With that, she wonders why. Since an inferior race shouldn't have so much power, the student stares at the protagonist with a very serious and distrustful look. Then the girl asks herself who this man is while he calms down the other instructor. 1 week later, we see the academy, which teaches many things to all its students. But the real purpose of the place is to train warriors to defeat the invaders. Students who can't keep up with the pace will be expelled without any mercy. However, the headmistress warns that if they graduate, they can even become holy knights. With a motivational speech, she affirms that everything depends solely on each person's ability. In the private boxes, a young man comments on the new students, and that many are commoners. Suddenly, a red-haired young man approaches the noble and greets her. His name is Reyes, and he's surprised to see the girl there since she doesn't care about others. With a smile, the young woman says her friend is also there to meet the new nobles. But the lion-eared young man gets serious and notices something strange in the seats. He asks why a mixed blood is with the instructors, and the girl says he is one of them. The red-haired young man is shocked, and the noble asks what he thinks of the new instructor. With that, the lion-eared young man is left speechless, not knowing how to answer his colleague. Then she says that she used to think he was just another unimportant mixed blood. From below, the protagonist observes the ceremony, while the nobles stare at him from a distance. The hero finds the academy gigantic and concludes that investigating everything will take a long time. But he feels the looks of disdain and decides he needs to change his image there. This way, the young man realizes he needs to earn everyone's respect so as not to seem suspicious. The scene then takes us to the imposing castle that serves as the headquarters of Harnisk Academy. In a classroom, the teacher announces that the spirit magic classes are about to resume. With that, he tells the elite class not to let guard down with the new freshmen. With a smirk, the instructor seems to have a malicious plan for the hero. He complains that the room is empty and asks if the students have lost their motivation. With her arms crossed, the noble replies that they have, but she doesn't seem very excited about the class. The large-nosed professor wonders who would want to listen to a mixed blood speak. Then he reveals that he spread the rumor that the class would be taught by an inferior race. The wolf-eared man calls the new instructor to introduce himself to the class. With a smile on his face, the protagonist introduces himself as Shido Jin to the students. He announces that he'll be teaching spirit magic for a while and hopes to get along with them. The lion-eared young man stares at him and questions if he's capable of doing the job. With a confident look, the hero replies that the decision is entirely up to the students themselves. The hero says that if they don't find the class useful, they don't have to participate, and the red-haired student smiles. But the protagonist warns that there is one rule everyone must follow without exception. At this, he displays his magic and asks them never to use that power against other people. He explains that spirit magic can stop the incredible regeneration of the invaders. However, this effect doesn't work on humans and only causes common battle injuries. With a serious look, the man in white says that the power was made to defeat their enemies. Then the instructor asks them not to use the magic in the wrong way, and the noble becomes thoughtful. But one of the students mocks the hero, calling him stupid because power is always power. The cat-eared young man says he came to see a mixed bloods class and hears that. Another colleague calls him weak and says he doesn't want to be compared to the others. With that, the whole class starts to laugh and make fun of the academy's new professor. The protagonist just watches the scene with a calm and expressionless look on his face. At this, he challenges the students, telling them to try if they think he has no power. The cat-eared young man doesn't understand, and the hero tells him to use his strongest power. With a smile, the instructor promises that if he gets hurt, he won't show up for class anymore. Completely confident with the proposal, the gray-haired young man breaks into a wide grin. He fills with energy and warns the mixed blood not to regret it, because it's already too late. The large-nosed professor panics and yells for the student to stop, as he would be hit. But the student ignores the warning and shouts for his target to take the full force of the blow. Then, a huge beam of yellow energy is launched toward the story's protagonist. The powerful energy beam hits the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust and smoke. With a smirk, the gray-haired student boasts about his incredible display of power. But suddenly, a sharp object made of ice flies toward the student at great speed. The attack grazes the young man's head, and he can't even see what happened properly. Completely scared, he stares at the wall and realizes the danger he was just in. With a cold look, the protagonist warns that if he had wanted to, the attack would have finished the boy off. Wrapped in a blue aura, he says that judging people by their appearance can be a fatal mistake. The red-haired young man is shocked by the scene and wonders if that was magic. With that, a colleague gets scared, and the hero remembers being called inferior for being a mixed blood. Then the instructor asks what they should call him, since he is much stronger than them. With a confident smile, he asserts himself and says that the correct answer is Professor. At that instant, the savior questions if the student knows the conditions to activate the magic. He points at the student and demands an immediate answer about his power. The cat-eared young man stammers and replies that it's just about visualization. With that, he explains the basics of projecting force into the spirits and manifesting the magic. The professor agrees that this is important, but warns that it's not the condition for activation. He reveals that the spirits are nanomachines that receive a wavelength. The student is confused, and the hero explains that there are 8 fundamental types of waves. At this, an image of a powerful fire magic appears to illustrate his explanation. Right after, a lightning spell also appears, showing another type of elemental power. The power of wind is also shown with a green energy in his hand. Then he displays ice magic and says they know the powers up to that point. But the instructor reveals that there are others, and the students are shocked by the news. The first new power is gravity manipulation with a sphere of purple energy. Right after, he shows the manipulation of light intensity with a white glow. Atmospheric pressure is also one of the powers that the protagonist masters skillfully. Lastly, he shows the spatial protection he used to defend himself from the earlier attack. The large-nosed professor shouts and asks if he uses 8 types of spirit magic. With that, the hero explains that visualization is the key to applying the basic concepts. With a smirk, he approaches his lectern to begin the class. Then, with everything settled, The savior asks if they can begin the real lesson. Later, the protagonist walks through the long corridors of the academy on his mission. He thinks that he needs to investigate the place, but encounters a big problem along the way. Students are walking everywhere, so he can't find anything suspicious. With that, the young man decides to look for a place where students are forbidden to enter. Suddenly, he and the blonde noble stare at each other from a distance with serious looks. The young woman then approaches and asks the new instructor who he really is. The hero admits he's not normal, and she states that he is no ordinary mixed blood. The student is shocked by the revelation and steps back a little from the protagonist. At this, the girl concludes that an inferior race couldn't possibly use all types of magic. The hero says he already taught this, and anyone can use it if they change their powers wave. But the noble replies that if it were that easy, he wouldn't be getting so much attention from the students. At this, the man in white asks her to talk somewhere more private, so the two head to a calmer courtyard with fewer people around. The blonde-haired student looks at him and asks if he's going to answer her questions. He reveals he's an ancient human who slept for 100 million years in the village. The young woman doesn't believe him and questions what he did so long ago in the past. With his hand on his chin, he replies that he did many things and was a special agent. She doesn't understand the term, and he explains it was someone who fought for their country. With a smile, he remembers facing countless villains in his old life. The scene shows us a flashback of him relaxing with his teammates. In a war room, his friend explains the attack strategy to the squad. Next, he remembers the missions as if everything had happened just yesterday. The white-haired warrior was running through explosions in the middle of a battlefield. Back in the present, the young man smiles with nostalgia at those good memories. The noble asks how he slept for so long, and he replies that he failed. At this, he admits he was arrogant and thought he could solve everything by himself. As a result, the hero lost everything and couldn't do anything against the monsters. He says he became an instructor, so he could count on their help in the future. The young woman asks where they are going, and he replies that she is fulfilling her duty as a guide. With that, the pair arrives at an old and dusty storage room in the academy. The girl then explains that this place is used to store the teacher's materials. With his hand on his chin, the protagonist understands that they are in an item storeroom. Looking around, he notices several books and a small old statue on the shelf. At this, the noble shows a paper and reveals that she also did her own investigation. She points to an empty and suspicious space on the floor plan next to that room. The young man understands the plan and approaches the old statue to activate the mechanism. With that, the bookshelf moves and reveals a secret passage with stairs. With the path open, he praises the young woman's deduction, as she was completely right. Then, the student asks how he discovered the location since everything was very dusty. The hero points to the spot and says it was too clean and that he used his intuition. He warns that he's going in alone, but the girl says she's going with him on the investigation. The instructor warns her of the danger, and she doesn't seem to care about his warning. The young woman boasts about her grades and says her skills are as good as her brother's. With a smirk, the protagonist agrees with the girl and decides to trust her. So the two descend the stairs, and he uses a sphere of light to illuminate the way. The noble observes the magic and comments on how light manipulation is a useful skill. The young man says the place looks like a fantasy game, and the girl doesn't understand the term. She then questions him about what he said before regarding fighting villains. The student asks if he has any suspects, and he smiles at his guide's eagerness. With his hand on his chin, the hero agrees and says he has an idea of who the culprit might be. He then reveals that Professor Rudman might be involved, and the young woman questions the reason. The instructor explains that the man seems calm, but his mind is always somewhere else. At this, he says it's a trait of people forced to do things against their will. The noble admits she suspected Professor Gilda, but the young man dismisses that idea. He states that her emotions are easy to read and that the woman is a good person. With a smirk, the protagonist continues down the stairs with his companion. Then the pair reaches the end of the corridor, and the light illuminates a large space ahead. The student is shocked by the size of the place, and never imagined this was under the school. Suddenly, the hero stops walking, and the girl asks what he found on the way. With a surprised look, he says he never thought he'd find that in a place like this. The scene reveals a huge metal door that seems to be the entrance to a laboratory. The white-haired young man confirms that it's one of the laboratories left behind by Kagura. With that, he explains that the door is protected by nanomachines, and he has no doubt about it. The young woman is shocked to see such a large door hidden underneath the academy. She asks if they can open it, and the instructor says they need an access key. The student doesn't understand, and the young man explains that it's like a normal key for unlocking it. At this, the protagonist becomes thoughtful as he tries to come up with a plan to enter the place. He remembers that the girl from the village had the key and concludes that someone here must have one too. With a determined look, the hero prepares a magic spell in his hand to solve the problem. He touches the door, and a blue light shines, confirming his access level to enter. With a loud noise, the huge metal door begins to open slowly. At this, the hero says that the person causing the chaos is the one who has the key to the place. Inside, the pair finds dozens of cages with monsters and a giant one in the center. Completely startled by the scene, the blonde-haired young woman is left speechless. She asks how he opened the door, and the young man replies that he has his advantages. The student stares at him and repeats the words, "ancient human," trying to understand everything. With her hand on her chin, she questions if he really came from 100 million years ago. The protagonist approaches one of the cages and stares at a green monster up close. Walking through the place, the warrior finds this whole situation very strange. With a serious look, he wonders why the monsters allowed themselves to be captured. The young man notices that none of the creatures even try to escape their prison. At this, he remembers that the bandits' monsters were also quiet in their cages. More importantly, he questions how they brought the beasts underneath the school. The noble concludes that her brother was right, and the academy is a suspicious place. With that, she suggests setting a trap. But the hero says that's not a good idea. He warns that the priority is to seal the place and take care of the monsters as soon as possible. The young woman is shocked by the plan and asks if they're going to let the culprit escape. The instructor says that if the monsters escape, the academy students will be the victims. Then he remembers that even her brother prioritizes people's safety above all else. The noble agrees with the plan, and the hero reveals he has a bad feeling about the place. He says his intuition never fails, and that he needs to investigate the laboratory more thoroughly. With that, he asks her to call her brother and seal the academy to avoid more trouble. The young woman agrees with the idea and runs off to call for backup from her night relative. Alone, the protagonist observes a huge clock on the wall and seems to be looking for something. He walks through the laboratory, hoping to find a clue about this whole situation. The scene focuses on the blue clock on the wall, which seems to be a very important object there. Meanwhile, at the academy, we see some teachers chatting calmly in the corridors. Two colleagues mock the large-nosed man, and he becomes furious with the malicious comments. Full of anger, the professor says his reputation has been ruined because of the new instructor. He accuses the hero of cheating and says it's impossible for someone to use 8 types of magic. With a look of hatred, the man vows to expose the outsider, and a voice calls his name. The headmistress reprimands him and asks him to stop his bizarre movements in front of everyone. The large-nosed professor is shocked by the headmistress and shouts that it's not a hobby. Then the woman asks if he's seen Professor Rudman, and the man is at a loss for words. With his hand on his chin, he replies that he hasn't seen his colleague since the school's entrance ceremony. The headmistress regrets the news, as she wanted to discuss the new student's curriculum with him. Suddenly, the woman feels something strange in the air, and her expression changes to a serious look. At this, she looks out the window and sees a dark purple energy covering the entire academy sky. At the same time, the young noble runs desperately up the stairs to complete her mission. the young woman finally reaches the top of the stairs and exits the secret passage. With her hand on her chest, she tries to catch her breath after running so much. She says she needs to warn her brother, but a voice interrupts her and questions what she's going to say. With a look of panic, the noble turns and faces the person who suddenly appeared. The student then sees Professor Rudman standing in front of her, blocking the way. With a malicious smile, the man reveals his true face, and the girl understands everything. In the laboratory, a door opens, and a red light illuminates the entire dark corridor. The hero turns around and questions what that thing is that appeared in the middle of the secret room. Inside the room, he finds a huge, pulsating brain connected to several machines. The organ glows with a red light and seems to be alive with constant pulsations. The white-haired young man approaches a panel and wonders if Kagura created that. At this, he fiddles with the computer and finds a secret compartment in the control desk. Inside the briefcase, the instructor finds a cube and an injection left by his friend. With the cube in his hand, the protagonist hopes to find a clue about the current situation. Then a hologram appears, and the image of Kagura shows up, saying he managed to get there. The scientist explains that this laboratory is the closest one to where the hero woke up. With a serious look, he reveals that they were building an incredible device there. His friend says that a part of the device's function was sealed in the nanomachines. With a genius pose, he praises himself and asks if the warrior knows what the device is. Kagura reveals that it's a teleportation device, and the hero is shocked by the news. He becomes thoughtful and wonders if that really is a device capable of teleportation. Before the hero, a gigantic creature appears, trapped behind the metal bars of that laboratory. At this, the circular object glows intensely with a red light and seems to be the core of everything. Looking around, the young man notices there are several cells containing frightening beasts in that place. At that moment, the clock on the wall starts to move in a very strange way, catching his attention. With that, he observes the details of the marker, which seems to hide some important secret from the past. Then the warrior returns to the control panel, while the machine above continues to pulse strongly. He analyzes the data on the screen and confirms that this device is used to connect 2 points. But the protagonist discovers that this technology was impossible to create millions of years ago. At that instant, the young man remembers Argus's words about the monsters attacking the royal capital. With that, the veteran concludes that the invaders are being sent through that sinister device. He observes the image of his old colleague and realizes that the laboratory hides something very dangerous. Suddenly, a very strong blue light emanates from a portal that has just been activated right in front of him. Surprised, the savior notices that the appearance of that equipment is completely different from what he expected. Then the hero wonders what that pulsating core could be if the teleportation has already been revealed. At this, the clock makes a loud noise, and the gears begin to spin at an absurd speed. At that moment, an explosion of red energy takes over the room, releasing a crushing pressure. He protects himself with his arm and tries to understand what's happening with that unstable mechanism. With that, the creatures in the cells start to get agitated as the scarlet glow consumes everything. The large monster opens its many yellowish eyes and seems ready to break out of its prison. A beam of red light explodes from the center of the laboratory, brightly illuminating everything around. In the courtyard, a female soldier runs desperately to warn Argus that something terrible is happening in the capital. With a worried look, the leader of the knights admits he already knew about the imminent danger. At that moment, hundreds of beasts fall from the sky and begin to destroy the city's houses in a devastating attack. In the library, the young blonde woman stares at the professor and asks why he has that strange look on his face. The man smiles maliciously and reveals that his plans are already underway throughout the kingdom. Annoyed, the student prepares her magic and tells the traitor to get out of her way, as he is involved in this. At this, the chubby man admits that she discovered the truth, but says it's now too late to stop him. Surprised by the confession, the blonde wonders what he means by those dark words. The villain explains that today was the day chosen for the grand plan to finally be executed. He reveals that the attack was supposed to be later, but he decided to move it up because she was investigating too much. At that instant, the enemy shows a cruel look as he watches the girl's fearful reaction. Meanwhile, the white-haired young man runs swiftly through the corridors to try to help. With his sharp intuition, the hero realizes that the professor is as great a danger as the king. At the entrance of the secret passage, the girl understands that the savior is already down there investigating the place. The traitor confirms that the outsider is in the laboratory and decides to end all her anxiety. Even though she's nervous, the young woman prepares for the fight and questions if the man really thinks he can win. Laughing loudly, the villain guarantees victory, claiming to have obtained an invincible and absolute power. With that, a frightening purple smoke surrounds the traitor, while the female students watch the chaos. Terrified, the blonde watches the transformation, and the enemy promises to show her his full potential. The villain shouts that this is his new power, while the little one watches him, holding a vase. At this, the blonde is completely in shock to see that the enemy went down in a very pathetic way. With a sigh of relief, the animal-eared young woman wipes the sweat from her brow after the physical effort. Then she celebrates her victory over the fallen traitor, while the other girl continues to tremble. At that moment, the noble questions what she is doing there, and the little one says she came looking for her hero. With that, the girl warns that things have gotten crazy outside, and they need help urgently. Then the freshman confirms that she saw the white-haired young man entering that secret place. But the blonde realizes the little girl is just a rookie and is impressed by her attitude. Worried, the student asks if it's okay to hit a professor, and her friend says it's fine. At this, the little one suggests blaming the noble for everything, since no one saw their faces during the confusion. That instant, we hear quick footsteps echoing down the corridor as someone approaches in a hurry. Then the protagonist appears and asks what happened to the traitor, who is passed out on the floor. He warns that the situation in the city has become dangerous, and that chaos has taken over all the streets. But the warrior reveals that the beasts from the laboratory have disappeared, which worries him greatly now. With that, the blonde panics as she understands that the monsters are free to attack people. At that moment, the group leaves the secret location and runs to try to save what's left of the capital. Looking from above, they see the city covered in flames and explosions that destroy everything in their path. A giant beast attacks the desperate residents, and fear spreads to every corner of the kingdom. Then a flying monster appears in the skies and begins to hunt the people trying to escape the destruction. With that, a colossal paw smashes the ground, showing that the army of monsters has begun its invasion. At this, we see a colossal beast that stares at the capital from a distance and prepares for the worst. Then the monster opens its mouth full of fangs and lets out a deafening roar. At that moment, the young blonde woman is paralyzed as she realizes the city is in real danger, but the warrior blames himself for not having destroyed that teleportation device earlier. With that, the eared girl points to the horizon and warns that something is coming. At this, the giant in the skies begins to charge a very destructive energy attack. Then a powerful beam shoots out from the beast's mouth and cuts through the sky toward the palace. The target is the royal castle, and the impact threatens to wipe out everything that exists there. The students fear for the royal family's lives, knowing the blow will be catastrophic. At that instant, the man in white holds an injection and decides he will act now. He applies the substance to his arm and feels the power of the nanomachines in his veins. Then his friend's voice warns that this special trump card can only be used once a day. At this, the scientist explains that the jump is short, but allows him to move in the blink of an eye. As the beam of light hits the kingdom, the hero prepares to do the impossible. With that, a blue portal appears out of nowhere in front of the girls, startling the whole group. The savior leaps through the dimensional rift and appears in mid-air to fight. He can now jump anywhere and throws himself toward the danger with total courage. A giant snake monster roars in the city, and panic spreads among the desperate citizens. Meanwhile, a soldier runs desperately down a long hallway, trying to warn of the danger. The young woman arrives, shouting for the guild master, and warns him about the giant corruptor at the wall. Calmly, the guild master replies that he already knows about the situation outside. At that moment, the man says that unfortunately, there's nothing more they can do. He explains that everyone who can fight is already outside helping with the civilian evacuation. The holy knights who are able to move are also already in the midst of a fierce battle. The girl asks what he means by that, and the leader explains the knights' situation. He reveals that half of them are outside the capital on a mission, which leaves the young woman shocked. With that, a shadowy creature with several yellow eyes appears, destroying everything in its path. The master understands that they attacked while the knights were away in a premeditated plan. With regret, he laments that if the great commander were there, they would have a chance. But the powerful energy beam continues on its path toward the kingdom's castle. Then, the soldier desperately points to the window and says that he needs to see this. However, upon looking outside, the veteran's expression completely changes to astonishment. The protagonist creates an energy shield to block the creature's devastating attack. From the window, the guild master and his subordinate watch the unbelievable scene. The young woman then recognizes him and says that man is from Kodama village, with a smile on her face. The giant monster observes the city from afar, preparing to continue the destruction. Down below, the savior quickly jumps from a building to the ground. He lands on the ground with a blue energy aura surrounding his entire body. At that moment, the young man concentrates an absurd amount of power in the palm of his hands. With that, a powerful blue energy beam is fired in the direction of the giant monster. The white-haired warrior faces his opponent with a serious and very determined look. The attack hits the creature's arm, which seems to feel the damage from the blow. The protagonist realizes the monster's mass is too large to take it down in one go. He also notices that the teleportation drained more energy than he had imagined. In that case, he decides to grab his energy sword to handle the situation by force. Wielding the weapon, he prepares for the fight, saying he'll take the opportunity to get some exercise. Then, the swordsman charges forward with full force, delivering a powerful energy slash at the enemy. The blow lands squarely, and the giant monster roars in pain and fury. With that, the hero propels himself into the air at high speed to continue the attack. He knows the monster will regenerate, but the blow has bought him some time. Then, with a focused gaze, the young man concentrates to use his special abilities. He decides he'll apply the basic concepts of nanomachines to fight. To do this, the warrior nullifies his body weight through gravity manipulation. His feet touch the ground lightly, as if he had no weight at all. Then, he generates wind by manipulating atmospheric pressure to move faster. Meanwhile, a fallen soldier is about to be attacked by another creature, but at that moment, a large fireball flies toward the enemy monster. The attack explodes on the beast, saving him, and someone announces they've arrived to provide support. The soldier recognizes the young people as students from Harness Academy. One of them thanks the soldiers for their courage as he prepares to fight. The two students with wolf ears get ready, as the capital is in trouble. They then find themselves surrounded by two monsters and know they need to fight with everything they've got. Suddenly, the protagonist stomps hard on the ground, creating a shockwave. In the blink of an eye, he cuts down the two creatures that were threatening the students. The young people are shocked by the sudden appearance and power of the white-haired man. One of them wonders if that guy is from a lesser species, and the other confirms it. The hero runs towards the Colossus, knowing its regeneration will take some time. However, the creature's arm completely regenerates, and it lets out a powerful roar. The beast then fires two energy beams from its shoulders toward the warrior. With agility, the savior dodges the attacks by jumping at the exact moment. He realizes that, aside from the previous attack, the monster isn't a major threat. The young man then advances through the streets, cutting down all the creatures in his path. He decides he will finish off the giant before it can attack again. The swordsman moves faster and faster, saving civilians and eliminating the monsters. With a determined smile, he focuses his power to increase his speed even more. Then, The warrior runs toward his main target to deliver the final blow. He jumps and unleashes a powerful vertical slash that cracks the ground with its force. In a swift motion, the swordsman delivers a powerful slash against the giant monster. At this, the multi-eyed creature is surprised and doesn't understand what just happened. In the distance, the knights watch the scene, shocked by the man's power. Elsewhere, the girls watch from a terrace and are also left speechless by the scene. Then, the white-haired young man charges forward at incredible speed to continue his attack. He then unleashes multiple high-speed slashes on the giant creature's body. With that, the blue energy slashes land a direct hit on the enemy, causing massive damage. From above, the warrior observes the result of his slashes, which surround the giant creature. At that moment, the savior lands and faces the monster, which seems ready to retaliate. Wielding his glowing blade, he prepares for the final attack and says that this is the end. With all his strength, he delivers one last devastating blow to the gigantic creature. Thus, the creature is hit by several energy beams that slice it completely. With that, a huge blue energy explosion occurs in the middle of the city, lighting up everything. The explosion is so powerful it can be seen from far away, over the kingdom's great wall. Inside the castle, an old man and a girl hear the explosion and look up, startled. The girl then asks what is happening, while the older man looks worried. The protagonist lands stylishly as the giant monster dissolves into green smoke. With his back turned, the savior hears someone wonder who on earth he could be. 3 days pass, and we see the city being rebuilt after the great monster attack. On the street, people wave to the white-haired young man, who watches from a building window. Inside the room, the young man stretches and thinks that despite the chaos, the damages weren't severe. Then, he sits on the bed and thinks it was all thanks to the competence of the holy knights. Many knights couldn't fight because they were on alert against the giant corruptors. Thanks to this, cleaning up the situation was quick, and the knights helped the citizens. The academy was sealed off for investigation, while knights stand guard at the gate. The professor, believed to be the mastermind of the attack, and Lord Rudman were finally captured. Other professors and the principal suspected of involvement were also taken in. He relaxes on the bed and thinks that the academy is on break, and he only went for 1 day, but he reflects that this whole incident has ended up giving him a new challenge ahead. He knows he can handle grouped enemies, but he can't finish them all at once. To protect everyone from the monsters, he concludes that he needs to become even stronger. To achieve this, he picks up the blue cube that his friend left behind in the laboratory. But at that moment, he hears a noise at the door and asks who is out there. Then, the white-haired young man opens the door and comes face to face with the blonde girl. Wearing an elegant dress, the young woman says she has come to escort him somewhere. With a smile on her face, the girl calls him master, leaving him a bit surprised. The warrior finds it strange and asks why she is there, and the young woman says her brother sent her. She explains that her brother wants to thank him and discuss another important matter with him. Then, the hero asks if she came all this way just to call for him, and the young woman confirms it. The young woman says it would be rude to send a mere servant to summon someone so important. Therefore, representing the Oltons family, she came personally, which makes him feel awkward. He asks if she has stopped calling him a lesser species, and the girl says she has reflected on it. With a theatrical gesture, she says one should not judge by appearance but respect everyone. For this reason, she hopes to receive his guidance, but the little one with ears appears at the door. The savior calls her by her name, and the little girl says she was bored and came to visit him. The blonde girl gets irritated by the other's presence and calls her a potato girl with disdain. She complains about the little one's audacity, and the hero reminds her that she said she had reflected on that. With that, they arrive at the large and luxurious mansion of the Argus family. The mansion's servants receive them and welcome the lady of the house. The butler asks for 2 children to guide them, and they accept the request with a smile. The white-haired young man says they seem used to it, and the little boy guides him through the place. The hero then asks if they were hurt during the commotion, and the child says no. She explains that everyone at work protected them, because they are very strong and skilled. He is happy to hear they are well treated, and the maid praises his bravery in the fight. The savior wonders who she heard that from, and the blonde girl replies it was from Lord Argus. She says that spreading his deeds is her duty as a disciple, leaving him very confused. Then she turns to the children and says they should follow the master's example. The little boy approaches and tells him that until the other day, Miss Milia was quite strict, but lately she has been kinder, and the hero thinks that's quite a turnaround. With that, the group continues walking and goes up a grand staircase toward a door. The blue-haired maid knocks on the door and announces the arrival of Master Jin to those inside. Upon entering the room, the white-haired young man comes face to face with two men waiting for him. One of them is an older man with wolf ears and a very serious and intimidating gaze. The blonde girl's brother invites him to come in and sit down while the children peek. With everyone seated, the knight apologizes for calling him so suddenly, but the hero doesn't mind. Then, the young man in armor decides he will introduce his companion to the newcomer. He introduces him as the guild master of the royal capital, named Lord Harden Gunslot. The man stands up and shakes the warrior's hand, saying it's a pleasure to meet him. Seated again, the guild master says he saw his performance during the incident. To be honest, if he hadn't stopped the creature, the country would be in a crisis right now. With that, he bows and thanks him on behalf of everyone for saving the nation. But the white-haired young man says he just defeated the big monster and nothing more. He says the holy knights took care of the rest and deserve the thanks. The guild master finds the young man very humble and wonders if he has no greed. The savior then asks if that was all they wanted, but the answer is no. Harden reveals that because of the incident, the royal family wishes to meet with him. The warrior is shocked by the news, and the man says he needs to clarify something first. With a serious look, the guild master directly asks who he really is. He explains that thanks to the guild members, there is no information that doesn't reach him. Harden apologizes for the intrusion, but says he found nothing about the young man. The knight in armor also wants to make it clear that this time, there will be no excuses. The girls look worried as he asks where the mysterious man came from. With a sharp gaze, he also asks what his purpose is in coming to this country. The white-haired young man faces the two men as they wait for an answer. The atmosphere in the room becomes tense, with all eyes on the silent warrior. The blonde knight stares at him with a serious and determined expression, awaiting the truth. Then, the young man says he wasn't hiding on purpose, scratching his head. He just thought no one would believe him, so he preferred to remain silent. With a smile, the knight says that if it's something he says, then he will believe it. The warrior then smiles and says in that case, he will believe his words. With a serious look, the white-haired young man reveals that he is a human from 100 million years ago. The knight recognizes him as the taboo from Kodama village they referred to. Shocked, he understands that the hero is the human who was sleeping behind the door that could not be opened. The guild master admits it's hard to believe right away, but he trusts the young man's words. The blonde girl then says the professor was in the underground and opened a forbidden door. The door was old and made of metal, with two large circular locks that kept it sealed. The young woman adds that her brother and the professors saw the savior's power with their own eyes. The knight calls his sister's attention, surprised by the revelation she just made. With a smile, the girl asks what happened, and her brother seems speechless. The warrior explains that he had been sleeping underground in that country for a very long time. The reason he went to the capital was to gather information about this era. The guild master asks what kind of information he was looking for, and the young man says there are two things. The first is about the corruptors, a threat he needs to understand better. He reveals that these creatures already existed 100 million years ago, which shocks everyone. But he adds that they shouldn't be alive in this current era. The knight asks why that is, and the young man explains it's because of the spirits. 100 million years ago, spirits were spread all over the world and maintained balance. We see a large energy tower being activated to spread this purifying force. The energy rises to the heavens and spreads like a great beam of blue light across the planet. From space, We see the energy spreading across the entire globe like a rain of light. Corruptors can only live in polluted places filled with negative energy, but the spirits have the power to purify these environments, making them uninhabitable for them. So, the young man wonders why the corruptors still exist in this era. He admits he doesn't know the details, but takes something out of his pocket to show them. With the blue cube in his hand, he projects a hologram of his friend, who says the corruptors have evolved. The guild master is amazed and asks if that is technology from an ancient civilization. He is curious about the system that makes it work, but the warrior can't say. Then, the white-haired young man says that's why he came to the royal capital. He wanted to know how the people of this era dealt with the monsters, and if there were any records. The master asks what the second thing is, and the hero replies that it's clues about the laboratories. He reveals that he is searching for laboratories scattered around the world, but keeps the part about power to himself. Then, the young man says that either way, he has only a single objective. With a determined look, he states that his goal is to erase the corruptors from this world. With the explanation finished, a silence falls over the room among the four present. The knight says that's quite a story, and the guild master agrees with him. But, with a smile, he says he will believe it, as they both want to fight against the monsters. That said, the young man in armor advises the hero not to tell this story to anyone else. With a confident smile, the warrior replies that he knows, as people would think he's crazy. The knight asks for the master's opinion, who says he'll believe it if he believes it too. Besides, he argues that someone with bad intentions wouldn't risk their life for the castle. At this, the mood in the room becomes much more relaxed, and the three seem to reach an agreement. But that moment, the maid and the little boy enter, apologizing for the interruption. The young woman announces that the appointed time is approaching, and the blonde knight asks if it's already time. Then, with a smile, he turns to the hero and the maid and asks them to get ready. The white-haired young man is a little confused by the request, but accepts the task anyway. With that, some time passes, and we see the wheel of a carriage spinning at high speed. The carriage then proceeds along a road toward the grand castle of the royal family. Inside the vehicle, the savior looks out the window and thinks that he's going to meet the country's royalty. He is wearing an elegant suit and wonders if he needed to change clothes. But Artis questions him. The young man in armor then says the suit looks very good on him, and the guild master agrees. The girls also compliment the young man's appearance, but he finds the clothes a bit hard to move in. Hardin explains that the person he will meet is the first prince, acting as king. He says they need to keep up appearances, and the warrior finds the whole thing a huge hassle. The carriage approaches the gate, and he just hopes not to get into any more trouble. Inside the castle, we see several knights in armor lined up, waiting for their arrival. Various races make up the royal guard, and they all seem to be very skilled warriors. The group enters the throne room, and Artis announces that he has brought the one who saved the country. In the distance, a powerful voice from the throne orders them to raise their heads. The three kneel as a sign of respect, and the white-haired hero lifts his gaze. He then finally faces the figure sitting on the throne and analyzes him with a watchful eye. On the throne is the first prince, Tails Kamosia, with a very imposing and confident pose. The young man introduces himself as Jin Shido, and the man on the throne just responds with a simple grunt. The prince says that on behalf of his ailing father, he will express the kingdom's gratitude for his deeds. He mentions that he heard from Argus that the hero came from the small Kodama village. With a mocking tone, he is surprised that someone so strong came from such a small place. With a dark smile, the man on the throne says he's going to be very direct with the young man. Without beating around the bush, he orders the savior to serve him as his loyal and obedient servant. The warrior is to become a holy knight and work to the bone for the country. The order echoes through the grand throne room, and the atmosphere becomes heavy and very uncomfortable. With glowing red eyes, he repeats the order with an expression of pure arrogance. The white-haired young man doesn't like the proposal at all, and his eyes gleam with anger. The prince notices the silence and asks what the problem is, since he hasn't heard a reply. Hardin then tries to intervene, reminding him that they were the ones who summoned the warrior there. He says the prince shouldn't speak, in a way that forces him to accept the proposal. But the hero interrupts him and says he doesn't plan to stay in that country for long. The man on the throne says he heard he works at the academy, and Jin confirms it's temporary. Then, the noble asks if that is a refusal, and the young man says yes, and that he is sorry for it. With a serious tone, he says in that case, there's nothing to be done, and the guards move. The castle's knights draw their swords, ready to attack at any moment. With that, the prince gives the order for the knights to capture the white-haired man. Hardin is shocked by the order and tries to stop the guards, but is restrained by them. The prince reveals that the warrior is suspected of trying to overthrow the state, which shocks everyone. He explains that a corruptor was hidden behind the academy's ancient door. Since they say the young man opened the door, it's natural to suspect him, according to the noble. With a wicked smile, he suggests that saving the country might have been an act. The guild master is furious with the accusation and says that it's ridiculous and extreme. The white-haired young man remains silent, with several weapons pointed at him. The prince says that if he had agreed to serve, he would have ignored the suspicions. With a malicious smile, he repeats that since he refused, there's nothing to be done. Argus tries to defend his friend, saying that he arrived in the city only a short time ago. He reminds the noble that he asked the young man to investigate the academy and had already informed him. The female knight realizes they were tricked and should have noticed from the reinforced security. The leader of the 3rd Division and other knights are fanatically loyal to the first prince. The commander of the 4th Division, a man with horns, is also part of the group loyal to the noble. The blonded knight knows that these two would commit any injustice in the prince's name. He understands that from the beginning, the intention was to get rid of the warrior if he refused. The prince says that letting someone who defeated the giant monster run loose is too dangerous. But with a dramatic gesture, he says he is merciful and will give one last chance. With glowing red eyes, he demands that the young man swear loyalty to him immediately. The hero remains silent, surrounded by the knights pointing their weapons at him. With a serious expression, the white-haired young man says he doesn't understand the situation. The noble is confused and asks what he means by that, which makes the atmosphere tense. The warrior explains that a verbal oath means nothing in that situation. He adds that if he obeys with words and flees later, the oath will have no value. The prince agrees that this is true, but the hero continues the provocation. With a sharp gaze, he says it seems the noble wants to force his words. The young man says he has been thinking about the true intentions of the man on the throne. He wonders if the prince just wants to satisfy his desire for control, or if there's something more. The warrior then tells him to be quiet with a firm and authoritative tone of voice. One of the knights gets angry and asks who he thinks he's talking to in that manner. With a smirk, the young man tells him to listen and grabs the tip of his spear. With a swift movement, he applies force to the weapon, which surprises the soldier. The horned knight asks what is happening, not understanding the young man's power. With a strong step, the warrior breaks the floor, and the soldier is shocked by his strength. At that moment, the white-haired young man says that he is the one talking now. With a quick and powerful move, he hurls the knight into the air. The noble on the throne is shocked by the scene and can't believe what he's seeing. The blonde knight puts a hand on his head, frustrated with the chaos that has started. The leader of the 3rd Division gets angry and tries to use her spirit magic against the hero, but to her surprise, the magic doesn't activate, and she orders the other guards to capture him. At this, the warrior blocks the guard's spear attack with great ease. With a swift motion, he kicks the soldier into the air, causing a huge impact. The white-haired young man maintains a calm posture, showing no effort at all. Then, a powerful blast of air throws all the other knights far away from there. The blonde prince becomes furious at the scene and demands they attack the insolent man right now. With that, the noble orders Argus to also join the fight to punish the traitor. The young man in armor draws his sword, while the guild master watches everything in silence. But the young man with wolf ears hesitates, breaking into a cold sweat as he faces his own friend. The man on the throne lets out a wicked laugh and says he doesn't care if the target is eliminated. Several soldiers run towards the hero, ready to capture him at any cost. At that moment, the silver-haired man concentrates an intense blue magical energy throughout his body. He releases an absurd burst of power that repels all enemies around him. The arrogant leader says it would be dangerous to let someone with that level of strength run loose. But the dust settles, and the guards are completely confused when they notice the target has vanished. The captain tries to look for him, while the prince claims his goal is to protect the people. A voice echoes in the smoke, revealing that he also wants to protect the people of this era. The savior mysteriously appears right behind the villain, leaving him completely terrified. With a dark gaze, the swordsman warns that he has no mercy for bad people. He then questions which side the noble is on, cornering him in an intimidating way. The ruler freezes in terror, realizing his life is in the hands of this human. The captain points her sword furiously, questioning if he knows what he's doing, and the hero confirms it. With a firm gaze, the young woman says she is resisting someone who is trying to force something completely irrational. At this, the fallen horned knight asks if he wants to oppose the country, and the young man denies the accusation. Facing the monster, the silver-haired man states very seriously that they are the ones doing this. The guild master becomes tense as the warrior explains he would show respect to true royalty, but he emphasizes that he would only help if the country's rules were fair and the request made any sense. The commander listens intently as the protagonist warns he is not so cheap as to accept everything silently. Angrily, the wounded guard hears that if they try to force something, they can't complain about his resistance. Then, the swordsman changes his tone and says that first of all, he wants to ask the noble a single question. The hero leans close to the prince's ear, asking if he thinks everything will always go his way. The blonde ruler starts to sweat, hearing the frightening voice question if he were something more. At that moment, the savior's eyes glow blue, demonstrating a very intimidating magical power. However, the great doors of the hall suddenly open, catching the attention of the captain and everyone there. Elegant footsteps echo through the place as a mysterious voice comments that she heard that whole story. With a gentle smile, a beautiful silver-haired young woman asks if she can join the conversation too. The young woman gracefully enters the throne room, passing by the guards who are completely paralyzed. Upon seeing the newcomer, the horned beastman is shocked and calls her by her name with great respect. The young blonde knight sighs in relief, realizing the girl managed to arrive in time to help. At this, artist thinks that now he will leave the rest in the hands of the powerful second princess of that kingdom. Charlotte smiles amicably, teasing her brother by saying he seems to be having a lot of fun. The prince glares at his sister with a furious look and says her name with contempt. He is visibly irritated by the girl's unexpected interference. With this, the blonde knight understands what is happening and seems much more relieved. The princess scolds her brother, saying he should have invited her to the meeting. With a mocking smile, she reminds him that he isn't even the official representative of their father. The noble grinds his teeth in anger at his younger sister's provocation. Then, he retorts that the man there is unfortunately not a true hero. The prince accuses him of being a criminal who dared to defy the royal family. The captain confirms the accusation and says the young man injured the commander of the knights. But the princess questions if that wasn't because he acted rudely first. The horned commander defends himself, saying the silver-haired man was going to harm the first prince. The white-haired young woman asks if he wasn't just standing behind her brother. With a smile, she turns to the protagonist and asks if that isn't correct. The warrior agrees and explains that he only approached to ask him a question. The princess then looks at her brother and says that's what the young man just said. She provokes him, asking if he would call someone a criminal for such a silly thing. The prince trembles with rage, unable to respond to his sister's arguments. Then, the princess turns again to the savior, calling him by his full name. With a curtsy, she says she will not ask him to serve this country as a servant, but she asks if he could help as a friend, and the young man smiles at the proposal. The white-haired young woman smiles happily and thanks him for the warrior's positive response. At this, she suggests they change locations, as this is not a good place to talk. With a gesture of authority, she orders the knights to guide her new friend. The captain and her soldiers accept the order and make way for the hero to pass. The prince watches everything with a look of pure fury, unable to do anything at all. A while later, a carriage leaves the castle, and the blonde man says that scared him. He asks why the silver-haired man did that, and the young man replies it was just a little. The hero actually felt a strange presence coming from the prince and hopes it's his imagination, but deep down, he knows that malignant feeling was very real and worrying. Elsewhere, the princess smiles and says he doesn't need to thank her, as he helped them before. The princess apologizes for her brother, but the hero says there's no need for that. With a smile, the young woman introduces herself again as Charlotte, the second princess. She then asks the savior to continue as a good friend, and he accepts the request. Argus questions the noble's attitude, but she doesn't know the exact reason for that action. The young woman reveals that her brother is a very ambitious man, full of plans for the future. His intention is to start wars to expand the territory as soon as he becomes king. With this, the young man understands that the noble considered him a major obstacle to his plans. The young woman assures him that she won't let her relative interfere in their lives anymore. She says Hardin is already reporting everything to their father, who is sick in his room. With that, the young woman reveals that she also doesn't intend to hand over the throne to her brother. With a serious and determined look, she asks if the warrior truly believes her. The white-haired young man smiles and replies yes, believing the young woman's words. In the carriage, Argus asks where they are going and why the princess is with them. She explains that it would be very rude to summon the country's savior without giving a reward. Then, the young woman comments that she heard he is staying in a simple inn. With that, the group arrives at their destination, and the young woman seems very excited about the surprise. With a big smile on her face, she says they have prepared a special gift for him.